Russia is burning, not metaphorically. Literally, right now, as I speak to you, massive firestorms are raging across Russia's most critical oil infrastructure deep inside its own territory. Flames reaching hundreds of feet into the sky, columns of thick black smoke stretching for miles, visible from satellites. Entire refining complexes turned into uncontrollable infernos that Russian emergency crews cannot contain. Twap's port hit again. The Syzran and Novokuybishevsk refineries in Samara engulfed. The Vysotsk terminal near Leningrad and facilities in Krasnodar's Tikhoretsk district also ablaze. This is not scattered sabotage. This is Ukraine unleashing the deadliest firestorm Russia has ever faced. A coordinated long-range drone campaign that Moscow simply cannot survive. What you are witnessing is not just another headline about drone strikes. This is a case study in structural military failure versus doctrinal adaptation. It proves beyond any doubt that Russia's assumptions about strategic depth and rear area invulnerability were always going to collapse. While Moscow poured resources into outdated Soviet-era thinking, Ukraine rewrote the rules of modern warfare with precision, innovation, and relentless execution. And by the time this analysis is finished, you will understand not just what happened in these firestorms, but why they were inevitable, why Russia has no real answer, and what this means for the rest of the war. Let that sink in for a moment. On paper, Russia should have been untouchable. Vast territory, layered air defenses, billions spent on S-400 batteries and Panzer systems, the belief that distance itself was a shield. Yet here we are. The firestorms are spreading, the smoke is choking their own logistics, and their rear areas, once considered sacrosanct, are now exposed as the weakest link in their entire war machine. To understand just how catastrophic this moment is, we have to pull the lens back and examine the false assumptions that brought Russia to this point. From the very beginning of this conflict, Russian planners operated on a doctrine rooted in the last century. They assumed their strategic rear would remain immune because Ukraine lacked the range, the technology, and the will to strike deep. They believed their air defense network, built for Cold War scenarios, could handle anything thrown at it. They calculated that even if a few drones got through, the damage would be negligible, easily repaired, and quickly forgotten. They told themselves that Western support for Ukraine would fizzle out, that sanctions would bite harder on Kyiv than on Moscow, and that their own oil and refining capacity would remain the unbreakable backbone of their war economy. Those assumptions were not just optimistic, they were doctrinally bankrupt. Russia never accounted for the speed at which Ukraine would adapt. They never imagined a Ukrainian force that could turn cheap commercial drones into precision-guided weapons capable of crossing hundreds of kilometers undetected. They never prepared for an opponent that treats every failed strike as a lesson, every success as a stepping stone to the next, more devastating operation. And they certainly never prepared for the compounding effect of repeated humiliation in their own backyard. Now let's walk through the escalating chronology that brought us to this deadliest firestorm. It did not happen overnight. It was a slow, methodical dismantling of Russian illusions, one strike at a time. Early in the conflict, Ukraine's deep strikes were limited, experimental, almost probing. A refinery here, a fuel depot there. Russia dismissed them as nuisance attacks, quickly repaired, no strategic impact. But Ukraine was learning. They refined drone designs. They improved navigation. They integrated better intelligence, often from open sources and Western partners, to pinpoint the exact vulnerabilities in Russian perimeter defenses. By late 2024 and into 2025, the pattern accelerated. Strikes on Twap's port became routine. Each time Russia promised improved defenses, each time Ukrainian drones found the gaps. Then came coordinated assaults on the Samara region refineries, Syzran, and Novokuybishevsk. Production halted for weeks. Repair crews worked under constant threat. Still, Moscow insisted these were isolated incidents, not a systemic threat. Meanwhile, Ukraine scaled up. In March alone, over 7,347 drones were launched in various operations, many targeting energy infrastructure. The numbers tell the story, not random harassment, but a deliberate campaign of attrition against Russia's refining capacity. And it gets even more serious from here. What began as single-target hits evolved into multi-wave synchronized operations. Drones launched in swarms, some acting as decoys to overwhelm radars, others carrying enhanced payloads designed to ignite maximum fires. Russian air defenses, stretched thin across the front lines, could not redeploy fast enough to cover every vulnerable site. Batteries that were supposed to protect strategic assets were pulled forward to shield troop concentrations, leaving the rear exposed. Commanders faced an impossible choice: protect the battlefield or protect the fuel that feeds the battlefield. They chose neither effectively. Pull the lens back further. This Firestorm campaign is not just about individual refineries. It is about the hidden military variable that Russia never saw coming: the asymmetry and adaptation speed. Ukraine treats warfare as an engineering problem. They iterate constantly. Low-cost drones modified with commercial components, long-range navigation systems cobbled together from off-the-shelf technology, and real-time targeting data that bypasses traditional military bureaucracy. Russia, by contrast, remains locked in rigid top-down doctrine. Their systems are heavy, expensive, and slow to adapt. When one Pantsir battery is overwhelmed by a drone swarm, they replace it with another identical unit instead of rethinking the entire layered defense concept. That rigidity is now costing them billions. What happened next changed not just the battlefield, but the logic of the war itself. In the latest wave, what we are calling the deadliest firestorm, Ukraine executed a near-perfect multi-site operation. Tuapse port struck twice in rapid succession. The fires there burned for days, consuming storage tanks and disrupting Black Sea export routes. Simultaneously, drones reached the Samara refineries, Syzran, and Novokuybishevsk, igniting infernos that shut down processing units critical to supplying fuel to the southern front. The Vysotsk terminal in Leningrad Oblast and Krasnodar's Tikhoretsk facilities were hit in coordinated waves, creating overlapping firestorms that overwhelmed local response capabilities. Smoke plumes rose so high they disrupted air traffic and were tracked by international satellites. The mainstream framing misses the point entirely. You will hear analysts call this asymmetric warfare or nuisance attacks on infrastructure. That language downplays the doctrinal earthquake. This is not nuisance. This is a direct assault on the foundation of Russia's war-sustaining economy. Oil refining capacity lost in these strikes represents hundreds of thousands of barrels per day offline, sometimes for months. Repair costs run into the billions. And every barrel not refined is a barrel not available for Russian forces at the front. Logistics chains that were already strained by sanctions are now snapping under the weight of literal fire. Let me walk you through what this actually means at the strategic level. Russia's military doctrine has always relied on mass and depth. Mass of artillery, mass of armor, depth of territory to absorb losses and regenerate forces. But depth only works if your rear areas can sustain the front. These firestorms expose the fatal flaw. Russia's rear is no longer secure. Their command and control nodes, their fuel depots, their refining complexes are now within Ukrainian reach. And Ukraine has demonstrated the ability to strike repeatedly, precisely, and at scale. The industrial and state-level consequences are already cascading. Russia's oil export revenues, a lifeline for funding the war, have taken a measurable hit. Refineries offline mean reduced domestic fuel production, forcing Moscow to choose between supplying civilians or the military. Black market fuel prices inside Russia are spiking. Logistics units at the front report delays in resupply. Tanker trucks that should be moving forward are now diverted to emergency firefighting or rerouting around damaged infrastructure. And this is compounding the effect of existing sanctions. Every drone that gets through tightens the noose a little more. What the Russian high command refuses to admit publicly is the psychological toll. Their troops see the smoke on the horizon, literally and figuratively. Morale, already brittle, erodes further when soldiers realize that even deep inside Russia, safety is an illusion. Commanders who promised impenetrable defenses are now forced to explain why drones keep getting through. This is the kind of slow bleed that turns tactical setbacks into strategic collapse. And it gets even more serious from here. The hidden variable in all of this is not just Ukrainian ingenuity. It is the integration of lessons learned across the entire theater. Ukraine has turned the Black Sea into a no-go zone for much of the Russian fleet. They have neutralized air superiority in key sectors. Now they are extending that same logic to Russia's strategic rear. Each successful firestorm validates the model. Cheap, attritable systems can defeat expensive layered defenses when paired with superior targeting and adaptation. Russia's response has been predictable. More static defenses, more redeployments that create new gaps elsewhere, more promises of retaliation that never seem to materialize at scale. This Firestorm campaign also reveals something profound about modern warfare doctrine. In the age of precision and persistence, territory alone is no longer a shield. What matters is the ability to sense, decide, and act faster than your opponent. Ukraine senses opportunities in real time. Russia decides in layers of bureaucracy and acts with systems designed for a different era. That adaptation asymmetry is now measurable in burning refineries and smoke-filled skies. Let's examine the climactic turning point operation in detail, the one that truly earns the label Deadliest Firestorm. In this latest coordinated assault, Ukrainian forces launched waves of drones across multiple axes. Some approached low and slow to test radar horizons. Others came in high and fast to force defenses to commit. Decoy drones drew fire from S-400 and Panzer batteries, exhausting their limited missile stocks. The real strike packages then penetrated the gaps, delivering payloads directly into storage tanks and processing units. At Tuapse, the secondary strike hit while repair crews were still on site from the first, turning recovery efforts into further chaos. In Samara, the simultaneous hits on Sizran and Novokuybishevsk created overlapping fire zones that prevented mutual support. The result was not just damage, it was systemic paralysis. Russian air defenses, already depleted by months of similar operations, failed at multiple levels. Radars were jammed or saturated. Command links were disrupted. Interceptors arrived too late or were diverted elsewhere. The firestorms that followed were not accidental. They were engineered outcomes of Ukraine's doctrinal evolution: strike the target, ensure ignition, deny rapid response, and let the fire do the rest of the work. This is not luck. This is the product of months of iteration. Ukraine has turned what Russia once dismissed as toy drones into a strategic weapon system that costs pennies on the dollar compared to the billion-dollar infrastructure it destroys. That cost asymmetry is now punishing Russia at the industrial scale. The larger pattern this confirms is unmistakable. Russia entered this conflict convinced that time was on its side, that attrition would favor the larger power, that Western resolve would crumble. Every assumption has been dismantled, not by superior numbers, but by superior adaptability. Ukraine has repeatedly shown it can reach where Russia cannot defend. It has turned defensive war into offensive innovation. And with each firestorm, it demonstrates that Russian rear area security, once the cornerstone of their strategy, is now a liability. Pull the lens all the way back. What we are seeing is the slow motion collapse of a military doctrine that refused to evolve. Russia's war machine looked formidable on paper. Massive stockpiles, nuclear umbrella, vast geography. Yet it is being dismantled piece by an opponent that learned faster, adapted smarter, and refused to accept the limitations Moscow tried to impose. The firestorms are the visible proof. The smoke is the signature of a strategy that no longer works. History will record this moment not as a series of lucky drone strikes, but as the point where the adaptation race was decisively won by Ukraine. Russia's assumptions about invulnerability have been exposed as the fatal flaw they always were. Their ability to sustain prolonged operations is now in question. Their economic lifeline is literally on fire. What happens next changes everything. Russia will attempt to reinforce rear defenses, but every battery move back creates a gap at the front. They will promise new systems and new tactics, but the tempo of Ukrainian innovation continues to outpace them. The firestorms will continue. The pressure on logistics will mount, and the strategic initiative, already shifting, will tilt further in Ukraine's favor. This is the broader lesson. In modern warfare, the side that adapts fastest wins. Ukraine has proven it understands this. Russia has proven it does not. The deadliest firestorm is not just burning oil. It is burning through the last illusions of Russian strategic superiority. Stay with us, because those questions about how far this campaign can reach, about how Russia will respond when its own heartland is no longer safe, do not have simple answers. The pattern is clear. The firestorms are spreading, and the war's next chapter is being written in flames.